Welcome to the TFD Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Sullivan. This is the show where we break down popular science, easily digestible, and actionable information to give you the blueprint to be a high performer in your life. Today, I'm joined by TFD Performance Dietitian Ryan Hasell. In this episode, Dojo and I are talking all about intermittent fasting. We're going to talk about this popular practice and break down what fasting is, the different ways you can do it, the proposed benefits, what the science actually says, how it compares to energy restriction, and whether we think people should do it or not. This is a good one, so let's get to it. All right, we are live for another episode of the TFD Performance Podcast. Joining me today, we've got the greatest mustache in all of nutrition. We've got Ryan Hasell, aka the Dojo Dietitian. Dojo, thanks for coming back on.
Thanks for having me, Jordy.
Really cool topic we're going to be talking about today. Something I probably deal with every single day of my professional career, and that is the topic of fasting. And I always get questions about this, no matter where I go. And I've avoided answering this question in public situations because I know this one always follows. Like I'm always out, say at a function, at a dinner or a lunch or whatever. One of the first questions everyone talks to me about fasting. Hey, do you know about fasting? Or hey, I tried fasting, or I'm doing this fasting protocol. Everyone loves fasting. I don't really get it. I do get it. I get why they want to do it. But once you understand the science behind it, and when you understand what actually goes on in the body, when you compare things like fasting to energy restriction, which we're going to be talking about today, you will understand why fasting may not be the holy grail that you think it is. Let's just get into it and kick it off, Dojo, because there's a lot of info we want to get in. We don't want to drag it out and be too long, but Dojo, let's just kick this off. Let's educate the people, tell the people about the science that is really behind fasting.
Right. Well, just to quickly run over, to make sure everyone's on the same page about it. So fasting is, for those that maybe haven't heard of it or aren't really sure what the different types of it are, because there's so many different types of fasting that get thrown around. Basically, fasting is just taking a break from eating for a particular amount of time that's kind of pre-planned. And the idea of fasting is not a new one, even though it's kind of popped up a bit more recently. It's sort of been around for hundreds and hundreds of years through religions and different cultures that use it for health reasons or whatever. But it has sort of more recently kicked off as a bit of a health fad, and kind of a hack for losing weight and losing fat and all that kind of stuff, with any kind of fad diet that comes through. But I guess the main thing here is the idea of it has come from this idea of way back in the day where maybe we were hunter gatherers or whatever, and we kind of have all this food at once, and then maybe we have to go without food for a while, and that being a more natural way of eating versus today where we can just graze out of the fridge every 15 minutes if we want to. And the science is kind of exploring is there something to that, in that if we're just constantly feeding ourselves all the time, is that causing any problems? So I guess the science of intermittent fasting or fasting is kind of looking at that, if that makes sense. Is there anything else there that I guess you would use to explain fasting to the people listening?
No, I think that covers it pretty well. I think ultimately what fasting is just restricting your food intake for a period of time, right? And it could be anything. There's many different ways that you can do it. A lot of people do it in the morning, they'll fast till lunchtime, or some people will do, they'll do a later fast or whatever, heaps of different structures. I always find that argument very interesting when they go the whole hunter-gatherer primal human thing, because it's oh, you know what, those guys didn't eat, in the mornings doing, because they had to go out and actually hunt it. I guarantee if you could time travel a hunter-gatherer or a primal person to 2022 and you put all of this food around them, guess what they would do? They would just be eating all the time, because that's what we're programmed to do. And we're going to get into all of that. So let's just jump into it, Dojo, because the science behind all of this is really cool.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess a good place to start is kind of there is different types, as you kind of mentioned there, Jordy, different types of protocols that have been used, and that's kind of one of the things that's gotten in the way of the science at the moment. But so we see different types, where people will fast for a couple of hours a day, usually that kind of coincides with sleep, right? Because that's an easy way to kind of just get rid of 8 hours without eating. And then most people might skip either dinner or breakfast, and then they end up with this 8-hour window of eating and then 16-ish hours of not eating. that's kind of one way of doing it. And that's what we would call more like, I guess, intermittent fasting. There is another way where it's like whole day fasting, where people will actually like alternate days of like eating versus not eating. And then sometimes they might even go up to like multiple days of the week, where you get like this 5-2 idea of sometimes people go like a weekend where they just don't eat and then they eat like during the week. Now, kind of like the science that's come through initially that kind of got everyone hyped up on all the fasting and all of that was that they were testing these different protocols in animals and seeing like, okay, well, what effect does it have on these animals' bodies? Is it causing them like any problems, or is it helping them out? And what they found was like there was actually some really cool improvements, mostly around like metabolic control. So what that means is like, obviously in our body, there's like a lot of processes going on, and usually to do with energy. This is like what we call like metabolism. And these processes, like when they get out of whack, that's when we start getting chronic diseases. So when our blood glucose, for example, is uncontrolled, then we're going to end up with things like diabetes or like damage to our blood vessels and like cardiovascular disease like down the line. So if we're able to kind of find ways to like control these systems, then potentially we can prevent these diseases later on in life. So the scientists saw that this was happening in the animals when they were doing these fasting protocols with them. And like, that's super exciting, right? Because like, well, potentially we found like this new way of preventing all these chronic diseases. The issue though, like as the scientists kind of come forward from there, is like, they haven't really been able to show a lot of this in humans. So like the bulk of this science of showing like these really positive health benefits has come from those animal studies. And as we know, like humans and animals, they are a little bit different. So like these results don't always translate across, right? So that's kind of like one issue with the science at the moment. Another one is like some of these diets, as you can tell, like kind of by the sound of them, they're not always the most easy to follow long term, and they all are sort of slightly different as well. So when we're trying to like compare research and like look into review the science and kind of put together a consensus of, okay, what does all this mean? Well, if one group of people is doing like the 2 days, the 5 days on, 2 days off, or like the 8 hours on, 16 hours off, like it kind of muddles up the I guess like the methods and stuff, and you can't really draw too much conclusion from these studies that have like really different designs. So there is a couple of issues with the science at the moment around intermittent fasting. But I guess like if we base it on what we see in the animal studies, it looks promising. We just need a lot more like conclusive evidence in humans, probably a lot more like long-term studies to be able to show this stuff in any like meaningful way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's always an interesting conversation when you talk about translating information that's gathered from animal studies into humans, and especially a lot of these are done on rodents, right? And I think rodents are very like, don't get me wrong, you can control for a lot of things, and we won't get too into the details, but a lot of scientific labs around the world breed a very specific type of mouse, and they do a lot of these studies on that specific type of mouse that has been shown to be better for certain experiments. But at the end of the day, an animal isn't a human. I know that's not great to say because there are a lot of genetic similarities between them and that we can draw these conclusions. But at the end of the day, like a mice is like a nocturnal animal, humans are not. There's so many different components. And when we think of layering nutrition on top of that, it can make pushing this forward and translating that and saying, you know what, we've worked on the mice in the lab, so it's probably going to work in there. Yeah, there's certain things, maybe if you can really narrow it down to genetic mechanisms or physiological mechanisms that exist in humans, and you say, yeah, okay, that can translate well across. That isn't always happening though. And a lot of these studies that we find, it's like, it's more of the outcome, right? We see the outcome in the mice and it's like, okay, now let's see if we do that exact same protocol, instead of looking at these really detailed mechanisms in humans, we're just going to look for the outcome. And often you don't find the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like what has kind of happened here as well, and like it's starting to get talked about a little bit more in the science, like people are kind of bringing up, is like this idea of like there was some more like theorized mechanisms in the beginning of like, oh cool, we're promoting autophagy, which is like basically the body's sort of clearance system of just like cleaning up old damaged cells and recycling them or getting rid of them. And like, that sounds really cool because like if your cell's DNA is damaged, like that's what can lead to cancer and stuff down the line. So if we're able to find a way to, I guess, like pick up on that stuff early and get rid of it, then like, oh wow, we can cure these diseases and shit. But in reality, like what it's looking more like at the moment is just that by restricting the amount of time that people have to eat, they're actually like reducing their total amount of food that they would be eating because they're not just like grazing all the time. And then so what ends up happening is we get these effects that might actually be caused just by like a certain level of calorie restriction. And so scientists have started looking into like, because we've known for a while that like a certain level of calorie restriction can be helpful, especially in people that are already sort of like metabolically at risk or like their metabolisms are slightly out of whack. So like maybe they're pre-diabetic or like they have poor like blood, like cholesterol levels and stuff like that. So they're already in need of improving their metabolic state. So a certain level of caloric restriction can be helpful in this population. And now they're kind of like drawing parallels here between like the effects of that calorie restriction and then the effects of intermittent fasting. So some of the things that have been shown in humans for intermittent fasting, for example, are things like weight loss, like waist circumference reduction, which just means like they're losing fat around like the midsection, which is one of the higher risk areas for having like body fat. And so like there is some positives that have been shown for fasting, but these are also really similar to the positive benefits that we see from caloric restriction. And they've tried comparing like with different factors. So like, okay, what if we have someone on like an exercise program for 12 weeks, and then one group is going to fast and one group is going to like just do a continual small calorie deficit. And it's the same thing, like both groups will put on a little bit of muscle, both groups will lose weight, both groups will lose a little bit of fat, but really there's no difference between the two. And then when they start to look at like the actual blood markers and stuff as well, so things like your glucose control, insulin sensitivity, like cholesterol levels, the improvements are really kind of like similar between all those groups. So yeah, I guess like the excitement of the hype around like the really cool sounding mechanisms has kind of been sort of, I guess, like phased out or being pushed towards more of like a realistic view of like, okay, fasting probably works to some degree, but maybe not for the reason that we thought initially.
Yeah, and that's a really good way to put it as well, especially if those people who are doing it are those quote unquote metabolically at risk people who are trying it. At the end of the day, right? Like I see this so often with clients, and you look at them and they just go, hey, you know what? I've started this fasting protocol and I've lost all this weight and I feel really good and my blood markers improved. And at the end of the day, that's awesome. Like if fasting is the thing that allows them to slip into that calorie deficit, to allow them to achieve this, to allow them to improve their waist circumference, to improve their blood lipids, that's awesome. Like I'm all for it. I think we just need to be careful about promoting intermittent fasting or fasting in general for something that it's not. And really, we're seeing it so much now. And there's not just one study. There's quite a lot of studies now, like Dojo said, that we're comparing intermittent fasting groups and then just calorically restricted groups, people that can wake up and as soon as they wake up, eat, and then just eat throughout the day, but they still are calorie matched overall. And the results are the same. They're exactly the same. And I think people just like fasting, and something I've found in practice. And if you're listening to this and you completely disagree, feel free to message us. And I'd love to hear if you agree with this, Dojo. But fasting just seems to be a way that gives people two things: discipline and structure. And that's two things that people lack when they're trying to make improvements to their health via a calorie deficit. And I'm not saying everyone has to go on a calorie deficit. You have to lose weight to be healthy. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying for people who are metabolically at risk, who are looking to improve their metabolism by using a diet and going into a calorie restriction, having discipline around your dietary choices and having structure are two things that are really important for succeeding in doing that. Fasting just seems to be a way to add that, where, okay, you know what, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to stay disciplined. And from when I wake up at 8 a.m., I'm just going to drink water and get my body really hydrated until 1 p.m. And then at 1 p.m., I'm going to have this meal. And then at 3 p.m., I'm going to have this. It just adds a bit of structure to it. But it's not saying that that method is the end all and be all. You can achieve the exact same thing if you like eating breakfast when you get up. It's just overall, it just seems I've found that a lot of people can control their caloric intake if they just go these few hours in the morning without eating, because there can be this struggle of, okay, I'll eat here, I'll eat here, I'll eat here, because you have a bit more flexibility if you don't eat in that morning period. Maybe if I overeat in the other areas of my day, it's not going to be that bad. And that's what I found most. What do you think about that, Dojo?
Yeah, honestly, like, so this is something I've had pop up a couple of times with clients, and like it makes sense, because some people, they just like to have bigger portion sizes, but then if they're trying to, like, as you said, like reduce calories, this is one way that they can still do that, but then like have some control over their calories. So they can have like normal sized meals, or like what they would normally eat, but then they're just maybe like removing one of those from their day. One thing though that's like kind of really important here to talk about though is the risks involved with like these sort of behaviors. So like if anyone wants to try intermittent fasting, or especially like even just calorie restriction, please like just get someone to make sure that they're like either like monitoring the process, or they're kind of like able to guide you along with that. So whether that's like a dietitian, a GP, whatever, it's really good to have someone that you can kind of like I guess talk to during the process, because like even just kind of like throwing around these ideas, it should seem pretty obvious that like there's a huge risk here of people going into like either with fasting, like a binge purge cycle where they kind of get into these areas of disordered eating, or even maybe down the line, like actual eating disorders, where they're like, oh, well, like mentally thinking like, oh, I can, if I really restrict for like, like 20 hours a day, and I've got this 4-hour window, I can just have like 6 Macca's family boxes or whatever. And they like just go from one end of the spectrum to the other during those times, where like we really want to still be responsible during the time when we're eating, if we are intermittent fasting. And then if we're calorie restricting, we also don't want to be like overly calorie restricting as well. So it's really important to, if you are going to sort of engage with any of these, I guess you would call them like lifestyle or like eating protocols or whatever, please like seek out some sort of guidance with them. Make sure you're not just like doing it on your own, because that's a time, especially if you've had like a history with, like weight or body image issues in the past. This stuff can be like really kind of risky, and can actually have some like really serious health risks if you get kind of like too far down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really, really important thing to mention here, right? And I think disordered eating patterns, when we talk about the work we do with athletes, a lot of what we do is in sports is inherently disordered anyway. And that's why it's so important to have someone who can guide you through that, and that can make you aware of what you're doing. If you find that fasting protocol works for you, that's absolutely fine, but you do need to be aware of what you're doing. And like Dojo said, you need to be aware that, okay, maybe you don't have a big appetite in the morning, absolutely fine, but you still need to get that nourishment and that nutrition in. And we want to encourage good protein pacing still throughout the day and get good even calories out, again, to discourage these binge purge cycles, like restriction and then a binge and then another restriction and then a binge. We don't want to do that. Again, I would highly, highly recommend that you go and talk to someone if you're going to do this. If you have people around you that are always talking about intermittent fasting or any other like time restricted feeding, I would keep an eye on them, because I've seen that so many times, and I've had athletes come to me and they use fasting kind of as an excuse to kind of blanket a bigger, deeper seated issue. I highly encourage, if you hear this, go talk to someone. It doesn't have to be, it can be a dietitian, it can be your GP, it can be a psychologist, psychiatrist, whoever it is, go out and talk to them. I think even just mentioning that there, Dojo, I think it's important to talk about this in the context of athletes, where we do a lot of our work as well, because I get heaps of athletes coming, especially what we do, weight category sports, where fact of the matter is we have to control for weight. We have to do it in order for these guys to participate in their sport. We have to monitor their weight. Is that the best thing ever? We can have a whole discussion on that. Fact of the matter right now is we have to consider their weight. This is something that is so, so, so prevalent. I have athletes all the time come to me, hey, I need to lose weight for this. I've just been fasting. And you go, oh, okay, maybe it's not the best thing. Dojo.
Yeah. So I think like in that context where they're kind of just using it as a last resort, that's when kind of like those alarm bells would be starting to ring. But like just to give people a bit more context as well around like how intermittent fasting or fasting in general might affect their sport, like I feel like that's important to know as well. because you don't want to be engaging in something that could potentially affect your performance and like just not even know about it. So I guess when it comes to the science, like the people have looked at intermittent fasting around like sports performance and that side of things. So far, it doesn't really look like it has any improvements. Like I guess the theory initially might have been that if they're training the body at these low sort of energy availability states, they might be able to upkick things like fat oxidation and increase like sort of base metabolic or like base sort of aerobic capacity, so like increasing just your endurance energy supply basically. But realistically, it hasn't really shown any improvements, maybe like slight improvements in VO2 max, but really the consensus seems to be like that those studies are sort of like few and far between and sort of inconsistent. But one thing that has sort of been shown is that sort of fasting over a like consistently long period of time. So one example of this that's common for athletes, right, is, and you would have seen a bit of this with like clients, is like when we come to Ramadan, like that period of, it's like a month, start of the year, where we have sort of like a cultural reason for fasting that sort of supersedes an athlete's like sport focus. There is some negative impacts on endurance and like energy metabolism during that time, because like, as you know, it's like a really long period of fasting. So they basically fast from sunrise to sunset, and then they eat like a meal maybe in the morning and in the evening. And so you do see like at the top level, like you think like athletes like Khabib and these athletes that engage in Ramadan, they usually try and avoid taking fights around Ramadan or these periods of time where they have to be fasted. And it's for that reason of impact on training and all of that thing, all of that side of things can be quite negative. And so like when considering doing it for yourself, if you're like, oh, should I fast to, I guess like drop weight really quickly to try and make weight for this fight, it's going to be important to consider that if you do something like that, it's likely going to have negative impact on your performance. Even if you do make weight, it's likely that you're probably just not going to be going into that fight or that competition sort of in the best possible state that you could be. So generally we would recommend like not doing like surprise fasts as a last resort.
Yeah, absolutely. I always talk about being a weasel or a wolf, and I say that to all of my clients. And I say, ultimately, if you want to be a wolf, you've got to eat and fuel properly around your training. And whether you want to do it or not around your fasting protocols, I don't really care. Like if you want to be the best athlete that you can be, you need to be fueling your body, one, for your training, and then more importantly for your recovery and top up after those sessions or in between sessions. And if you're doing big, heavy, intense sessions in the morning, then have to back up again, either at lunchtime and then again at nighttime or just at nighttime, you need to refuel that. You can't be fasting throughout that. And I know it's tempting to think, oh, you know what, it'll help improve my body composition, it'll help increase my fat oxidation. It doesn't. What improves all of those things is fueling properly and training correctly. And to do that, you need to be fueling your body. I think one other thing that I want to touch on before we go, Dojo, is just overall general healthy individuals. And one individual I'm thinking of is this doctor I always go back and forth with. We get along, but I used to work with him. He's a neurosurgeon, very into like CrossFit and whatnot. He has very, very weird ideas about nutrition. Very smart guy in his field, very not so educated when it comes to nutrition. He always makes the argument that, you know what, fasting, for even if you're just general and healthy, is going to be great for the reasons you mentioned earlier, you know, autophagy and things like that. And I often make the argument to him and say, you know what, maybe, I'm not going to say absolutely no, because you never say never when it comes to science, but what's having more of effect? Is it your intermittent fasting that you're skipping breakfast in the morning? Or is it the fact that you're getting 8 hours of sleep every day? Or is it the fact that you're adequately hydrating, or when you are eating, you're getting good serves of colored variety of fruit and veg, and you're eating good sources of protein, whether that's animal or plant-based, and you're getting lots of different micronutrients, and you're eating good whole foods throughout the day. And yeah, you're enjoying good social interactions throughout your day. You've good financial management. You're relatively stress-free in the big scheme of things, and you know, have good friendship and support groups around you. Is it the intermittent fasting that's causing all these health benefits, or is it all of those other things? And I think when you talk about this in more like, I want to say like prominent in like, because I feel like this is something that more like I hate to say it, but like upper class people will often talk about and say, oh, intermittent fasting is great. It's like, yeah, that's great from your place of privilege when you can put all of these other things into place and you can eat really well and you can afford to go to yoga class and you can go out and do all these social things. It's probably not the intermittent fasting. It's probably everything else that you're doing in your life that's giving you those positive health benefits.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think like it's kind of that idea of, you know, putting a band-aid on a bullet hole, like just using intermittent fasting to try and cure everything. And I think this is something that probably the martial arts community would understand, is like, you have to get the fundamentals first before you see any improvement from learning some really cool technique or whatever. Like the fundamentals, sleep, like just good, healthy nutrition, getting all your veggies, all of that kind of stuff is going to be like way better than just like having an absolute shit show of life and then being like, oh, but I fast for 16 hours a day, so I'm going to be sweet. Like you have to get the fundamentals down first, and then you can start to layer on things and kind of experiment with maybe it will work for you, but see how you feel once you've got the fundamentals down first.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great spot to leave it, Dojo. Any other final words on fasting before we go?
No, that covers it. Sweet. Thanks, Geordie.
All right, Dojo, until next time, if you guys have any questions about this, if you guys want a topic that we want to talk about or you want us to talk about, feel free to drop us a message in our DM, shoot us an email, whatever it is you can do to get in contact with us. Don't hesitate. We'll talk about it. All right, guys, until next time. And there it is, another episode of the TFD Performance Podcast. Hopefully that clears up some of the confusion around fasting. If you personally love doing it, then power to you. That is great. We just need to be careful about preaching about benefits that may not exist when we take a closer look at the practice under the microscope. This podcast will be available through the podcast app, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and if you follow along our socials at @the_fight dietitian, you can see all of the best bits from our podcast episodes. Thanks for listening in, and I'll see you guys for the next episode of the TFD Performance Podcast.